My name is Tessa Monroe. I am 36. I work as a security and protective operations specialist who once wore Air Force Blue. Tonight I walk into a hall glittering with medals and polished shoes. The air smells like brass polish and citrus. The band plays marches that tighten the spine on instinct. This is my father's retirement gala, not mine. Every eye knows the difference. I steady my breath. My heels click once, twice. I keep moving. My father, Colonel Richard Monroe, stands at the center like a lighthouse of rank and stories. His ribbon rack is a skyline. His voice carries without a microphone. He sees me and smiles the way commanders smile before they issue a hard order. He raises his glass. He beckons me closer. He turns to the circle of men who flew with him and women who briefed him. He performs. "This is my daughter, Tessa," he says, warm at first, then colder. She tried the soldier's life. She did not finish. She stepped off the ladder. He sets the glass down. He looks at the room. He gives the verdict that has followed me like a shadow. "She's a failed soldier," Dad tells the guests at his retirement gala. Applause falters, laughter stutters. Someone clears a throat. There is a flick of perfume and pearls beside me. My sister Trina never misses her cue. She leans in with a smile that photographs well. "No space for you here," my sister sneers. She taps the seating chart with a manicured nail. Every name is a door that closes. The joke lands, the table laughs, the band keeps playing. The floor under my shoes feels like ice. I plant my feet anyway. I keep my voice level. I say, "Congratulations, sir." I call him sir because the uniform is safer than the word father. I tell Trina her dress is elegant. The truth costs nothing. A waiter offers champagne. I lift water instead. I need a clear head, not bubbles. My fingers remember a different evening, a different corridor, a different kind of silence where people breathe through fear and wait for someone to open a way out. Motif begins. Place or no place, seat or no seat, belonging or the absence of it. The hall is a theater and I am cast as the extra who wandered into the frame. I can feel the audience writing captions above my head. Quit early, could not hack it. Disappointment in heels. The thing about captions is that they never match the whole picture. They crop the edges. They miss the moving parts. My father lifts the microphone. He thanks commanders and crews. He salutes absent friends. He speaks about duty. He speaks about staying the course. He speaks about how the Air Force taught him to hold the line. He pauses at family. He lets pride pour over Trina like a parade. When he turns to me, the spotlight chills. He repeats the story of me that fits his thesis. I watch him construct a neat equation where rank equals worth. I note the variables he left outside the brackets. I do not argue. I count breaths. I focus on the little things, the seams in his dress blues, the chip in his wedding band, the tremor that comes with age and memory. I let the room underestimate me. Invisibility is a tool when people make noise with certainty. I stir the water with a straw. The glass hums like a tuning fork. The sound reminds me to stay on key. There is a slideshow running behind the dais. Jets, deployments, medals pinned over steady chests. A child appears. A girl in a flight suit costume with shoelaces too long. My father kneels in the photo. He is smiling with the pride I used to live on. The image flashes away. The march resumes. Applause rises like surf and falls. The MC invites us to take our seats. Trina blocks my path with the chart one more time. Theater needs repetition. Cruelty loves ritual. I step aside. I find a chair near a pillar where shadows pool. I take out my phone. No messages. Only the quiet glow of a screen waiting for news. I have learned to wait, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. You sit, you listen, you keep your back straight until the moment requires motion. The moment always arrives without warning. When it does, truth walks in, wearing boots hard. I am still in the pillar's shadow when the slideshow freezes. A hard click pops over the speakers. The projector jumps from photographs to a live feed. The banner reads breaking news. The anchor's voice is brisk and low. A caption names a place I know well, the Lexington Federal Building. The room tilts toward the screens as one. Forks pause, glasses hover. The video shows a stairwell lit by emergency strips. A line of civilians moves down in tight order. A woman in black gear guides the line. She checks corners. She nods once. She turns back up the stairs. The camera shakes when a gunshot cracks. The woman steadies. She closes distance. She hooks a rifle. The weapon skids. The assailant hits concrete. The feed cuts to the anchor. Then another angle rolls. A security camera shows the woman signaling from a doorway. A caption identifies her. Technical Sergeant Retired Tessa Monroe, former USAF Security Forces. J. Sote, USACOM Liaison. The letters look strange and familiar at once. People whisper. The air changes temperature. The hall that smelled like citrus now smells like cold and static. The MC lifts his hand and lowers it. There is no competing with a live operation. The angle shifts to a corridor full of dust. The woman pushes a cabinet to block a cross hall. She hoists a child to a taller civilian. She draws a sidearm with a motion that wastes nothing. Another shot. The camera jolts. A door slams. The woman goes toward the noise instead of away. Training is a metronome. It keeps the hands moving when the heart tries to rush. A chair scrapes. General Marcus Halstead stands. The silver of 4 stars catches light like a signal flare. His voice carries over the silence. He points at the screen. His hand is steady. Dear God, she is on the breaking news. Heads turn in a wave toward my father. My father does not blink. His face has the stunned set of a man watching a storm take a sharp turn. The glass in his hand sweats. His knuckles whiten. The stem slips. The flute falls. It strikes the table and shatters. Champagne leaps. Droplets glitter. Then the room is quiet. The words he spoke minutes ago hang with the shards. The feed returns to the anchor, then to a street shot. Sirens strobe red and blue. A spokesperson confirms that all hostages are accounted for. A single elbow wound. Suspects in custody. Federal partners coordinating. No fatalities. The camera rolls a last clip. The woman in black guides the final civilians through a service exit. She gives her weapon to an agent. She presses a radio to her ear. She vanishes behind a loading dock. At the next table, someone says the old words, failed soldier. The phrase dissolves on contact with the evidence. Another voice tries to rescue the story. If she is so capable, why did she separate? A third voice answers. Capability and rank are cousins, not twins. The argument hums and dies. The room recalibrates. My phone vibrates. A message from my team lead. Confirmed safe, report filed. Stand by for debrief at 1000. Media traffic heavy, company shield active. I exhale. Across the floor, Trina is suddenly very busy with her clutch. She studies the stitching as if it might solve something. She looks up at me. For the first time all night, she cannot find a line to throw. General Halstead crosses the space with the unhurried stride of a man who moves fast by moving calm. He stops beside my father. He sets a hand on the older man's shoulder. He does not remove his eyes from the screen. Richard, the room is looking for you, he says. My father opens his mouth. No sound comes. The anchor repeats my name, confirms roles. Thanks the teams, the feed cuts. The slideshow tries to resume and fails. Silence lands like a parachute that refuses to billow. My father sways. He turns to sit. The chair is not where he expects. His knee catches the table. He goes down on one hand. The room surges. People rush, then pause. I remain where I am, the pillar cool against my shoulder, the marble cool through my shoes. Breath in, breath out, center, observe, decide later. The narrative that narrowed me into a single word just met the rest of the sentence. The period moved, the meaning changed. The hall waits to hear the new line read aloud. Now, when the screen in the Gala hall finally went dark, I kept my breathing steady. I let my mind drift back to a place where things had been simpler. Before the uniforms and the unspoken verdicts, before the word failed became welded to my name. I was 10 years old, wearing a child-sized flight suit that my father had ordered special from the base exchange. The sleeves were too long. The zipper caught at the top. The patch on the chest read Monroe in block letters just like his. We were at an award ceremony on base. The sun was sharp and clean. Flags cracked in the wind. My father's dress blues were immaculate. His shoes reflected the sky. He stood at parade rest until the master sergeant called him forward. They pinned a medal on his chest that day. I remember the click of the clasp, the applause, the weight of pride that seemed to fill the air like a tangible thing. I clung to his side. My small hand disappeared inside his. When a reporter knelt to ask what I wanted to be when I grew up, I didn't hesitate. I said I wanted to protect people, just like my dad. He looked down at me then, his face breaking into a smile so warm it felt like sunlight. He squeezed my hand, bent low, and whispered, "You can do anything, Tess. Anything." That sentence was a seed planted deep in my chest. I watered it every day after, with every run on the track, every book I read about aircraft, every letter I wrote to bases across the country asking about their planes. I thought his approval was permanent, like the stitching on the patch. I didn't know it could fray. That afternoon after the ceremony, we walked across the tarmac together. He let me sit in the cockpit of an F-16. The canopy was open. The air smelled faintly of fuel. He pointed to each instrument. His voice was patient, proud. Altitude indicator, airspeed, artificial horizon. The tools you use to know where you are, even when you can't see the ground. I thought that was a metaphor he meant for me. I clung to it, not realizing how quickly you can lose your bearings when the horizon disappears. For years after that, I chased the image of us on that tarmac. I imagined him watching me graduate from the academy, pinning wings to my uniform, shaking my hand like I was both daughter and peer. I imagined us speaking the same language of service, of loyalty, of putting others first. But the reality didn't align. My path through the Air Force was not the straight line I'd drawn in my head as a kid. I had setbacks, injuries that healed slow, assignments that challenged more than they rewarded. Moments where politics outweighed merit. I adapted, I shifted roles, but to my father, each detour was a subtraction from that childhood promise. The last time I saw his warm smile was years before tonight. Over time, his gaze cooled, calcified. Approval became conditional. Love felt like a performance I had to earn with rank and ribbons. The memory of his hand around mine faded under the weight of his silences. And yet, in that frozen second at the gala tonight, when General Halstead's voice cut through the air and the room turned toward the screen, a sliver of that childhood scene came back. Not because my father's expression softened, it didn't, but because I remembered who I had been before his opinion became my compass. I remembered the girl who believed she could do anything, not because someone else said so, but because she wanted to help. It struck me then, sitting in that shadowed corner, that my whole life had been about reconciling those two versions of him. The man on the tarmac teaching me the instruments, and the man in the gala hall dismissing me in front of his peers. One had planted the seed, the other tried to cut it down. The irony was that both had shaped me into the woman on that breaking news feed. The applause from that long-ago ceremony echoed faintly in my ears, mingling with the stunned quiet of tonight's hall. The contrast was sharp enough to sting. I knew then that whatever came next would not be about winning his approval back. It would be about standing in my own space, whether or not he or anyone chose to see it as mine. After the silence in the hall, my mind followed the thread of how the rift began. I joined the Air Force at 19 in security forces. Long shifts on flight lines, gate inspections, drills that left sweat in my boots. I watched hands more than faces. I practiced de-escalation until my voice steadied. I carried weight without complaint. By the 4th year, I deployed to a dust-colored province where the wind tasted like salt and grit. The night we lost a gun truck, I wrote the names of the injured and the dead in a green notebook. I still keep that notebook. Every page is a promise to be sharper next time. At year 6, a joint cadre visited our base to observe training. They watched me plan a perimeter under a time limit, adjust when a variable shifted, keep my hands still while I spoke. A quiet selection followed. An interview, a waiver, a seat at a course that did not advertise. By year 7, I was rotating into missions with the Joint Special Operations Task Element under USOCOM. JSOT did work that prefers shadows to headlines. Our job was to move people out of harm with the least noise possible. See patterns early, keep small fires from growing. We trained in buildings with unpredictable doors, rehearsed evacuations with uncooperative role players, rode elevators until the chime felt like a test. An instructor gave me the line I still carry: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Another added, your job is to stop the bad minute from becoming an hour. Those lines fit the way my mind handles panic. In year 10, a stairwell sprint went wrong. My right knee torqued, a pop, a flash of black at the edges. I finished the run on stubbornness and adrenaline. The scan showed damage that would never love long rucks again. Rehab worked, not perfectly. I could run, I could fight, I could lead. But the joint had limits that J. Sodi respected. My father did not. Around year 12, a civilian agency asked me to build a protective operations program that blended threat analysis with practical extraction. They wanted someone who could read a room, who could teach rookies to see the quiet tells, who could design safe corridors through crowds. The mission matched my strengths and honored my knee. I separated honorably at 12 years and served under contracts that kept the same oath. The letter had changed. The work did not. My days filled with site surveys, layered routes, and briefings that put calm into frightened voices. I did not leave service. I changed the uniform I wore while doing it. My father heard a different story and repeated it nightly. To him, separation meant surrender. Rank was the narrative and the moral. Over dinner, he said I had started something I should have finished. Soldiers stay. I told him service has more than one uniform. Impact is not rank dependent. Integrity is not sewn to a sleeve. He shook his head and called it quitting, often loudly. He would not read the letters that listed my duties, because the letterhead did not say Department of the Air Force. The rift did not explode. It widened by degrees. He skipped a ceremony where my team received a commendation. He sent Trina instead. She reported that the room was full of civilians, as if that settled the case. I kept showing up to birthdays. He kept introducing me as someone who almost belonged. Each time he said almost, the runway in my chest shortened by a foot. Each time I tightened my knee brace, I remembered that doing the work is not the same as being seen. Trina never argued with my father. She reinforced him. If he called my career a detour, she called it a dead end. She had learned early that agreeing with him kept her in the center of the room, and she liked that vantage point. We were children when she first told me I didn't belong. It was at a neighbor's cookout, and she whispered it while passing me a plate. Back then, I thought she meant the picnic table. Years later, I realized she meant the table in every room that mattered to her. After I left active duty, she sharpened the phrase. At a holiday dinner, while my father carved the turkey, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. You've never belonged in the places that count. Her voice was soft, but the sentence landed like a gavel. She saw the uniform as an admission ticket to respect. Without it, she believed I was wandering without a destination. My civilian work, briefings with agencies, planning secure evacuations, meant nothing to her, because it didn't carry the public weight she could point to. She would tilt her head when I described a mission, then ask if it came with a medal or just a paycheck. When invitations went out for military family events, she would forget to send me the details until the day after. If I arrived anyway, she made sure my chair was at the far end, next to people who didn't know my name. The motif of no space became a pattern she curated. An empty seat in the photos, my name missing from group emails, my work brushed aside in conversation. Once, during a memorial for one of my former teammates, she introduced me to a retired colonel as my sister who used to try the military thing. I watched the colonel's polite smile hold steady, but I caught the faint shift in his posture. Recognition that the jab was intentional. That night, driving home, I realized Trina's loyalty to my father wasn't just about agreement. It was about maintaining a hierarchy where she was always closer to the center and I was always on the fringe. Her words were not shouted, but they were permanent. Every time she told me I never belonged in important places, it echoed in the moments I was standing exactly where I needed to be. On a rooftop at dawn, in a secured hallway, in the middle of a rescue. I learned to measure importance differently, but the refrain stayed, waiting to be answered. The day of the gala hadn't started in silk and candlelight. It started in Kevlar and reinforced boots. I was on a special rotation, tasked with escorting a high-level federal witness to the Lexington Federal Building for a closed-door deposition. My role was straightforward: get him inside, stay invisible, and get him out without a ripple. Years in USAF security forces and later with the Joint Special Operations Task Element had drilled that discipline into me, precision without spotlight. We cleared the perimeter before sunrise. I walked the witness through the side entrance, my earpiece alive with the calm chatter of my team. Clear on the east stairwell, lobby quiet, service elevator ready. The first 3 hours passed without incident. I kept a hand on the door frame of the conference room as the witness met with federal attorneys, my eyes sweeping hallways, noting who didn't belong. It was just past 10 a.m. when the tone in my earpiece changed. A single word, low and sharp, movement. The feed from our security liaison cut in. Grainy video from a ceiling camera on the 8th floor. 4 men in dark tactical gear emerged from the stairwell, rifles slung forward. Their formation was deliberate, practiced. They didn't run, they advanced. The command center confirmed what I already sensed. This was not a random disturbance. My mind clicked into operational mode. Lexington wasn't just another federal building. The 8th floor housed a secured records archive, and today, a panel of intelligence officers debriefing multiple assets. If that floor was compromised, the fallout wouldn't be local. I keyed my mic. Team 2, seal elevator access on 7. Team 3, push civilians down to 5 and lock stairwell doors. The witness I'd been guarding looked up from his files, reading the shift in my face. I told him plainly, "You're moving, now." One of our agents took his arm, guiding him toward the sub-level garage. My focus narrowed to the threat above. By the time I reached the stairwell, I could hear the muffled thud of a door kicked in. The men were inside the archive level. They'd chosen a choke point, a place where civilians couldn't simply scatter. My training from JSOT kicked in, evaluate, adapt, commit. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for a full tactical team. Seconds meant lives, and in a hostage scenario, hesitation was just another word for surrender. I pressed my comm again. "All units, contain on 8. I'm going up." The reply was clipped. "Copy, Monroe." My boots hit each step like a drumbeat. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about the gala or the fact my father was hours away from toasting his retirement. I wasn't thinking about Trina or the empty chairs she liked to save me. My mind was a grid. Positions, angles, cover, entry points. Halfway up, I caught sight of one of the gunmen through the glass pane of the fire door. He was pacing, scanning the hallway, his rifle at the low ready. Behind him, through a sliver of view, I saw frightened civilians huddled against the far wall. Their faces were pale, hands clasped tightly, as if holding on to each other could keep the danger out. That image anchored me. The mission had just changed. What was supposed to be a routine escort was now a containment and extraction. I double-checked the weight of the sidearm at my hip, adjusted the strap of my plate carrier, and reminded myself of the first rule I'd learned in the field. The plan is just a suggestion. Survival is the objective. That was the moment, standing outside a hostage-filled hallway, that the rest of my day would be rewritten. And by the time the news cameras found the footage, it would no longer belong just to me. From my position at the stairwell door, I could only see slivers of the 8th floor, hallway corners, the edge of a desk, the flicker of movement and shadows. That limitation was both a curse and a shield. Too much visibility could freeze your instincts. Too little forced you to trust training over fear. I pressed my earpiece in tighter as the voice of our JSOT tactical coordinator came through, measured, calm. "Monroe, FBI hostage rescue is spinning up from Quantico. 20 minutes out. Your eyes on until then." 20 minutes in a live hostage scenario felt like 20 hours. Our JSOT element had split, 2 operators flanking from the north stairwell, one moving through the duct system to gain a ceiling vantage. My job was to lock the south approach and feed every scrap of intel to the command net. I crouched low, angling my body to reduce exposure. Through the narrow pane, I counted 2 gunmen in sight. One was the pacing sentry I'd spotted earlier. The other stood further down the corridor, posture rigid, scanning a closed office door. I couldn't see inside that office, but the low murmur of voices, terrified, pleading, leaked under the frame. The FBI negotiator patched into our channel, her voice steady but probing. "Identify yourself. Let's talk about what you need." The gunman by the office didn't respond. Instead, he raised his rifle, tapping the barrel against the door once, twice. an audible warning to whoever was inside. I relayed the action quietly. Subject 2, corridor west, door contact, possible escalation. My breath fogged the glass. I eased back to avoid giving away movement. In my peripheral vision, one of our JSOT flankers signaled. 2 fingers up, then a directional sweep. He had eyes on a third assailant near the central archive vault. Information was coming in fragmented. Half from what I could see, half from the murmured updates of my teammates. We were a web, each holding a strand. None of us with the full picture. That's the nature of being an invisible protector. The civilians never see you, and the threat never knows you're closer than they think. The FBI lead made another pass at contact, offering food and medical supplies in exchange for releasing a hostage. The sentry by the hall shook his head violently, muttering something into his radio. I couldn't hear his words, but the body language told me enough. He wasn't the one making decisions. Whoever was in command wasn't in sight yet. I adjusted my position, the edge of my vest brushing the wall, and caught sight of a reflection in a glass photo frame mounted on the far side of the hall. It was faint, distorted, but there, another figure, seated just inside the vault room, one leg stretched out. He was in no rush. That kind of composure in an armed standoff was dangerous. It meant planning, patience. Command, I whispered. Possible primary in vault room, unconfirmed visual. The acknowledgement came with a reminder to hold position. We weren't greenlit for entry until the FBI was in breach range. Those next minutes were the hardest, knowing civilians were 10 yards away, that I had a loaded weapon and a clear sense of direction, but not the full clearance to act. Patience is part of protection. The wrong move can kill more than it saves. So I watched, listened, and fed the network every shift in the hallway. Every flicker of a shadow, every tilt of a rifle barrel. The civilians inside never knew I was there. The gunmen never realized the south stairwell was no longer theirs. And as the clock ticked toward the FBI's arrival, my world narrowed to one truth. Sometimes the most decisive acts happen in silence, unseen, until the moment they break into daylight. The order came down crisp and low through my earpiece. Monroe, you're on point for Group Alpha. 15 hostages, conference room east. Secure passage and get them out. I eased the stairwell door open just enough to catch the sentry's rhythm, 3 steps toward the office, pause, 2 steps back. Timing would be everything. Our FBI negotiator was still working the line, her voice keeping their focus just long enough for me to move. The corridor felt narrower than it was. I could see the fear in the hostages' faces through the glass panel in the conference door. Crowded together, eyes darting between the gunmen and the exit they thought they couldn't reach. I stepped forward, weapon trained but voice even. You're going to let them go. Now. The gunman's eyes flickered with uncertainty. No one leaves. You're wrong, I said, keeping my tone steady. They're walking out, and you're staying put. It was a strange inversion of the words my father had thrown at me at the gala. No space for you here. I was giving these civilians the exact opposite. Space to breathe. Space to live. The man hesitated, knuckles whitening around his rifle grip. I shifted my stance, making sure he saw the calm in my posture, the certainty that this was already decided. You've got one choice that doesn't end badly. Step aside. A long beat passed. Then, with a curt nod, he moved back toward the wall. I pulled the door open and motioned the hostages out, keeping my body between them and any danger downrange. As they passed into the stairwell, one woman's hand brushed my sleeve. A whispered, "Thank you," almost lost in the rush. I didn't answer. The only thing that mattered was that they were outside, where they had a place. The hallway was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass shoulder to shoulder. I was moving fast, covering the rear as the last of Group Alpha disappeared into the stairwell, when a shadow broke from the far corner. A man in tactical black came at me low, his rifle already shouldered. I didn't think, I reacted. I drove my forearm into the barrel, shoving it offline as the first round cracked into the drywall beside my head. The blast was so close I felt the heat of the muzzle, a rush of scorched powder on my cheek. He tried to wrench the weapon back, but I stepped into him, forcing his momentum upward. The strap caught around his neck, jerking his head back. I could hear my own breathing, short, sharp pulls, as I slammed my shoulder into his chest. pinning him against the wall. His elbow shot toward my ribs, catching enough to knock the wind from me. Pain flared hot, but I kept my grip on the rifle. My left hand slid down the barrel until it seared against my palm. I held anyway, twisting with everything I had. The weapon came free with a jerk that nearly sent me off balance. He lunged for it, but I drove the buttstock hard into his sternum. The sound was a deep, ugly thud. His breath left him in a ragged gasp. Behind me, I caught the pounding footsteps of hostages fleeing down the stairwell. Light shoes slapping concrete, a child's high-pitched cry. That sound was the anchor in the chaos, the reminder why I couldn't let this man recover. He swung a desperate punch that grazed my jaw. I stepped inside it, used the rifle like a lever, and took him down hard. His back hitting the floor with a hollow smack. My knee pinned his arm while my fingers stayed tight on the trigger guard, ready if he moved again. The hallway smelled of burnt powder and sweat. My heart hammered in my ears, each beat drowning out the fading footfalls of the last hostage. For the first time since the Gala, I felt the ground under me, solid, certain. The rifle was hot in my hands, but it was mine now. The rifle was still hot against my palms when the radio cracked in my ear. Third subject shifting west. Possible VIP acquisition. Another voice followed, clipped and calm. Target is retired Colonel Daniel Avery, sheltering in Record Suite 8 West with 1 admin. Shooter 3 closing from Copier Bay. The name hit like a pulse. Avery had flown with my father, he had eaten at our table, he had once shown me how to fold a scarf straight for inspections. My jaw set without permission. Copy, I said. South stairwell secure. I am mobile west. I cinched my sling, keyed the stairwell door, and slid along the wall. I kept my muzzle low and my steps quiet. The tiles glittered with mica flecks under fluorescent light. At the copier bay, I used a compact mirror to peek the angle. The view gave me enough. One shooter crouched behind a cabinet, muzzle covering the record suite door. Finger flat along the guard, not the trigger. FBI hostage rescue was still minutes out. Our JSOW element held the north stairs. One teammate crawled above ceiling tiles to build a picture. I owned the south corridor. The negotiator came over the building speakers. Her tone was steady and human. We want to keep everyone safe. Talk to me about what you need. The shooter did not speak. He rolled his shoulders, checked his sight, shifted his weight onto his heels. A straight push would risk rounds through glass. A blind rush would turn the door into a funnel. I needed his eyes somewhere else for 3 seconds. The copier's tray gaped open. A stack leaned out like a loose tooth. One controlled breath would create noise. Command, I whispered. Sound cue on my count. North flank flexed 2 steps right on 3. A double click answered. I inhaled and blew across the page. It slapped down. The sensor woke. The machine tried to pull and jammed. The bass screamed with an ugly mechanical screech. The shooter snapped toward the noise. His cheek lifted from the stock. I stepped out hard, front sight to sternum, voice level. Drop it and show me your hands. He twisted back with real speed. We fired in the same beat. I drove forward into the cold fog. My left hand found a mail cart. I shoved it into his knees. He stumbled. I cut the angle, shoulder to hip. Tile came up hard under both of us. He fought dirty, clawing for a secondary. I pinned his wrist and torqued until the pistol loosened. Do not, I said. He felt the intent and stilled. I stripped the pistol, kicked it under the copier, rolled him prone, and cinched a flex cuff high on his wrists. Status, the net asked. Subject 3 contained? Corridor west clear, I said. Confirm Avery. That snapped me back to the door with the narrow glass. I knocked twice. Low? Federal security. Latch only. The chain slid. The door opened an inch. One eye looked out, steady even with fear at the edges. Colonel Avery, I said, we are moving. You and your admin will exit single file, right side, heads down. He took one look at my name tape and nodded. Monroe, he whispered. Richard's kid. We can talk later, sir. He set a hand on the admin's shoulder and gave the tiniest push forward. I stepped into the threshold and shaped my body to shield them. Then we moved in a low glide. The stairwell door was 30 feet and felt like a mile. I opened it with my left hand and angled them through. Down 3 flights to Team 3. Keep right. Do not stop, I said. Avery's fingers closed around my sleeve for a beat. Your father will want to know you were here. He will learn another way, I said. Move now. He met my eyes for one steady second. Then he obeyed and guided the admin down the stairs. I closed the door and let my forehead touch the cool metal. He would sit right there until someone else owned custody. Hostage Group Bravo inbound to Level 5. HRT entry in 3. Standby containment. I glanced at the wall clock and was surprised that the minute hand had not completed a circle. In work like this, time stretches and snaps back without warning. They would only see later angles. The public corridor, the clean handoff, the part the cameras caught. The detail would remain here in the dust, on the glass where my breath had fogged, in the soft scuff my boot left by the copier. The negotiator asked for proof of life. A hostage answered with a trembling yes. The tone of the operation shifted by a degree, not solved, not safe, but trending toward daylight. I listened for the sound that did not fit. A reset fan, a radio chirp, a footstep where no one should be. Invisible work is about creating a path and then getting out of the way. I had opened one more space where none had existed a minute before. A corridor in which two people could pass, a margin of survival with room to breathe. Avery would reach the street. The admin would call her family. The cuffed man would ride a chain of custody into a courtroom. The Gala would raise glasses later. They would talk about speeches and songs. I lifted my rifle, checked my corners, and moved back toward the center of the floor. By the time Lexington transitioned to HRT and the last signature dried, I stood in a service corridor behind another event space, concrete underfoot, the air carrying coffee and warm dust. A backstage monitor hung from a steel arm, captions scrolled, the anchor's cadence held steady. I did not watch the replay first. I checked my phone, debrief at 10:00, liaison satisfied, medical clears pending. I flexed my right knee to find the line between strength and caution. Across town, the Gala slid from ceremony to surprise. The live feed cut into their slideshow without warning. The projector flashed. The band lost its place. The lens found faces before thoughts caught up. A flight surgeon squinted as if the light hurt. A crew chief leaned forward until his tie touched his plate. A finance officer set her fork down and folded her hands. The camera drifted and settled. It told the room what had happened without asking. On the monitor near me, the stairwell clip rolled again. A line of civilians, the green hoodie, the silver ring, my hand up. The turn back into noise. I washed toner from my knuckles at a utility sink. Black water curled away. The smell of metal rose. A caterer rattled past with a rack of glasses. Bells against chrome. The chime pulled a memory of champagne striking marble. I felt the room, not my room, inhale. At the head table, the lens framed Trina. Her smile missed its cue. The muscles around her eyes worked to hold a mask. The mask failed. She looked toward my father. He was frozen in the posture rank teaches. Shoulders square, chin level, hands seeking a glass that was not there. Shame is quieter than anger. It weighs, it makes eyes drop and mouths go still. The words he had spoken hovered like a caption the room no longer accepted. General Halstead rose. 4 stars caught the light. He did not need a microphone. He pointed at the screen, not at my father. He let the room decide what to learn. The MC's script fluttered. The band held a suspended note. Protocol paused. The camera widened. People remembered moments when certainty had felt safe and wrong. My phone hummed. A brief from the team lead. All hostages accounted for. Suspects secured. Media heavy. Company shield active. I answered with 3 words. Standing by now. I breathed once to slow my pulse. I felt the weight of the rifle I was no longer carrying. Titles crawled under my name. Technical Sergeant retired. USAF Security Forces. J. Sauti. USOCOM. Labels are neat. The work is not. The Gala camera drifted past the table where I had not been given a seat. It rested on the empty chair as if it had a speaking part. Silence grew. A chaplain bowed his head. A young airman glanced from face to face. A logistics major tapped his ring on glass and stopped. The lens cut to my father in profile. The color left his face, his jaw held like steel. He swayed. He corrected. He sat because standing had become a decision. I cracked the loading door and let night air clear the detergent from the corridor. Rain carried the iron smell. Weather was turning. A push alert slid across my screen. Local station, hostages safe. Contractor credited. Investigation ongoing. Contractor reads clean. It misses heat and heartbeat. Inside the hall, the lens searched for someone to speak. A former pilot set his palm down. A housing manager dabbed her eye. Trina lifted her chin and then let it fall. She did not find a line. When they finally said my name, it sounded different. Vowels careful, consonants lighter. The room did not applaud. It listened. A man who had laughed earlier covered his mouth with 2 fingers and stared at the screen as if it might look back. I closed the door and faced the monitor again. The anchor recapped in measured beats. The footage paused on a frame where my hand directed civilians into a stairwell. My face was out of view. Space was visible where none had existed a minute prior. That was the point. Not vindication. The making of a path so strangers could live. In the gala hall, the camera finally settled on my father's hands. They were still. They were empty. The skin over the knuckles had gone pale. A napkin lay near his wrist like a flag at rest. Around him, the people who had known him longest waited. The story he had told for years no longer fit its frame. I watched the moment harden into memory. I felt no triumph, only a steady quiet. The work was finished for now. The consequences were beginning. The hall and I drew the same deliberate breath. The broadcast was still looping when the whispers began. They moved like a current under the formal chatter, a ripple you could hear if you'd learned to listen for danger. One voice, male, clipped, asked, "If she's that capable, why isn't she still in uniform?" Another, softer but no less pointed, added, "Real soldiers don't just walk away." The words carried a certain practiced weight, as if they'd been stored for a moment exactly like this. In the gala hall, faces tilted toward one another, eyes flicking from the screen to my father. Someone adjusted his cufflink twice before speaking. The question, what makes a career successful in the military, wasn't new. But here, in the middle of a retirement gala filled with brass and dress blues, it carried an edge. From my vantage backstage, I couldn't hear every word, but the body language translated clearly on the monitor. Chairs shifted. A table of younger officers leaned in, one whispering into his hand. A retired command chief gave a slow, skeptical nod to something his seatmate said. It wasn't the footage that bothered them. It was the story they thought they knew about me. The man who had spoken loudest leaned back, his voice rising above the hush. "She quit," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough for it to travel. Combat-ready security forces don't leave over a knee injury if they want to keep serving. If she was really committed, she'd be here in blues, not civvies on a news clip. It would have ended there, just another round of quiet gatekeeping, if not for Marcus Halstead. The general rose again, not hurried, but with a finality that made 3 tables stop mid-conversation. His 4 stars caught the stage light, silver against midnight blue. "Colonel," he began, though my father didn't look up. "This," Halstead said, pointing at the paused frame of me guiding civilians into the stairwell, "is service. You want to measure commitment? Measure it in risk. Measure it in the willingness to run toward the sound you want no part of. And if you think that ends when someone leaves active duty, you've forgotten the first thing we teach." The air changed. A few nodded, more froze, unsure which way the current would shift. The man who'd spoken loudest muttered something into his drink, but no one answered him. Tension didn't leave, it thickened. A woman in a dark green mess dress, her ribbons neat and high, spoke from 2 tables over. "General, with respect, success in the Air Force means staying in. We've all faced injuries, family crises, hard deployments. We stayed." Her tone was steady, but the challenge was real. Halstead stepped toward her table. Staying is one form of service. Knowing when to leave and finding another way to protect is another. What you saw on that screen tonight, that was a Joint Special Operations Tactical Element asset, contracted under federal authority, moving in a live hostage environment without backup in sight. She didn't need a uniform to do it, and she sure as hell didn't need anyone's permission. The camera caught Trina's reaction then, eyebrows lifting, a glance toward my father that held both curiosity and calculation. Her lips moved, barely. Gisote? As if the acronym alone was a revelation. But not everyone was convinced. A major in the back raised his glass as if making a toast. Still, he said, when the uniform comes off, so does the weight of the oath. That's why retirement ceremonies mean something. His table murmured agreement, but no one clapped. Halstead's voice cut through again, sharper now. The oath doesn't expire. I've buried too many who proved that with their lives long after their discharge papers were signed. He looked toward the screen, not toward them. You want to talk about real soldiers? They're the ones who find a way to keep serving, inside or outside the system, even when it costs them more than their career. I leaned a shoulder into the cool cinder block wall backstage, listening to the silence that followed. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't dissent. It was the sound of people recalculating the story they thought they understood. The whispers didn't vanish. One guest still asked, "But why did she really leave?" As if my medical file was public property. Another wondered aloud if I'd been pushed out, and the heroics were a bid for relevance. Even in the face of proof, people cling to the version of events that keeps their own world tidy. Halstead didn't try to win everyone. He let the facts stand on the screen, looping over and over. Me pulling civilians through the exit. Me turning back in when I could have walked away. The rifle clattering against tile. The grainy freeze frame where my hand, open and steady, made space in a corridor that seconds before had been a dead end. It was not applause that followed, but something harder to earn in that room, attention. Every table, every uniform, every set of civilian clothes turned toward the evidence, and for a moment, no one spoke about rank or discharge codes, or the narrow frame they'd built around the word success. In that moment, I understood something. Vindication wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It just needed to exist, undeniable, in the same room as the people who had once decided there was no place for me. And whether they admitted it tonight or not, the place was there now. Not because they'd offered it, but because I had made it. The hallway was dim, lit only by the spill of warm light from the Gala doors. It smelled faintly of old wood polish and champagne, familiar scents from countless base events I'd attended as a child. Footsteps echoed behind me, slow but deliberate. "Tessa," my father's voice carried down the corridor, stripped of the sharpness I'd heard earlier that night. I turned. He was alone now, the noise of clinking glasses and low conversation muffled behind the heavy doors. His posture was still military, spine straight, shoulders squared. But there was a tightness around his eyes I didn't recognize. He stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a low breath, he said, "I didn't know." The words felt awkward in his mouth, as if they'd never been practiced. I didn't move toward him. "You never asked." The reply came out quiet, but it landed between us like something heavier than sound. He blinked once, as if the thought hadn't occurred to him. "When you left the Air Force, I thought you couldn't handle it. I thought—" He paused, eyes shifting to the floor, "that you had chosen to step away because it was easier." "Easier?" I asked, and the word felt foreign in my throat. "There's nothing easy about carrying what I carried after Lexington, or before that." His gaze lifted to meet mine. "I saw you on that screen. You moved civilians past armed men without a rifle in your own hands. You went back in when anyone else would have stayed out. And all this time, I was telling people you'd failed." The hallway seemed to grow quieter. The music from inside faded to a dull hum, and all I could hear was the faint rattle of a glass cart rolling somewhere down the far end. "I didn't just leave," I said. I told him about the knee injury, how the cartilage had torn during a mission in Kandahar, how the doctors said I'd never be at full operational capacity again, how Jay Sodhi had come to me afterward, offering a role that required less running but more risk, how I'd taken it, knowing I couldn't tell him or anyone because the work was classified. His hands tightened at his sides. "And I never knew." He said it again, not as an excuse this time, but as an acknowledgement of what that meant. I nodded once. "Because you never wanted to hear anything but your version." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth hung there in the still air, untouched by the noise of celebration just beyond the wall. He looked away, toward the faint flicker of the exit sign. I told people there was no space for you. I told myself that too. When his eyes returned to me, there was no rank in them, no uniform, just the man who had once lifted me onto his shoulders at an air show. I was wrong. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, carrying the weight of years. A passing waiter, not noticing us, rattled by with a tray of half-empty champagne flutes. We both glanced toward the sound, then back at each other. "Why tonight?" I asked finally. "Why come out here?" His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. "Because I watched a 4-star general stand up for you when I hadn't. Because I saw you do the kind of work I told myself you couldn't. And because, if I walked out of here without saying something, I might never get another chance." The words didn't erase the hurt. They didn't stitch over the years of dismissal or the sting of public humiliation, but they were a start. One I'd stopped expecting long ago. I stepped back, letting a little more space stretch between us. "I'm not looking for an apology, Dad. I'm looking for you to see me as I am. Not as the soldier you wanted, not as the failure you imagined, just me." He gave the smallest nod. "Then, I'll start there." The muffled sound of applause drifted from the gala doors, followed by the voice of the master of ceremonies announcing the next segment. Neither of us moved to go back inside. For the first time in years, the distance between us wasn't measured in rank or expectation. It was measured in choice. And tonight, both of us had chosen to stay. 5 years earlier, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon had filled my sister's dining room. It was one of those holiday dinners where the table looked like a magazine spread. Silverware aligned, crystal glasses catching the light, conversation humming under the surface. I had just sat down when my father, in the middle of a story about his own deployments, glanced my way and said, "Of course, not everyone in the family finished what they started." A beat later, he added with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Some of us decided the military was too much. Right, Tessa?" Forks paused midair. Trina smirked at her plate like she'd been waiting for it. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my skin prickle. I remembered keeping my head down, moving the cranberry sauce closer, as if that was more important than defending myself. I hadn't corrected him. I hadn't told him that just 2 days earlier, I'd been embedded in a freezing mountain region overseas, carrying intel that would prevent an attack. I hadn't told him I was still in service, just no longer in a uniform anyone at that table would recognize. Because the mission was classified, and because part of me had already learned the futility of trying to rewrite his version of me in front of an audience that preferred his. So I let the silence confirm his assumption. That night became a fixed point in my mind. A moment that reinforced his narrative, that I was the soldier who quit. I carried it for years, replaying it with the sting intact. But standing in that hallway with him now, the echo of that dinner in my head, I realized something unsettling. Maybe he really didn't know. Maybe, despite his years in the service, he'd never imagined there were roles that operated beyond the rank structure he understood. And maybe I'd let my own resentment cement his ignorance. I didn't say any of this out loud. I let the memory sit where it was, like a picture frame left hanging slightly crooked on the wall, something the viewer notices but doesn't straighten. I knew the audience, anyone watching my life from the outside, would connect the dots themselves. In that moment, I wasn't sure if the hurt I'd carried all these years had been built entirely by him, or partly by me. He looked at me then, really looked, like the man who had once lifted me onto his shoulders at an air show so I could see the jets. "I keep remembering you at 10 years old," he said quietly. "You were wearing that little flight suit I bought you. You told everyone in the hangar you were going to protect people just like me." His voice wavered, not much, but enough that I heard the undercurrent. "I was proud of you that day. I still am, but somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that pride had been misplaced. I let that feeling turn into something else." "Shame?" I asked. He hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Yes. Not because of what you did, but because I thought you'd walked away. And I didn't know how to reconcile that with the girl who once believed she could do anything." The air between us shifted. For years, I'd seen him as all edges, uniform, protocol, command. But now, in the dim hallway, there was a softness under the steel. It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was something rare, something that caught me off guard. A vertical spike of emotion, sharp, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. For the first time, I thought maybe he'd begun to see me. Not the failed soldier, not the daughter who didn't fit at his table, but the woman who had always been standing exactly where she was needed. The weeks that followed moved in a strange rhythm, slow in the quiet moments, fast when my name was suddenly everywhere. I'd barely caught my breath from Lexington when I stood on the stage of the Department of Justice's headquarters. The Attorney General herself pinned a medal to my lapel, her words carrying more weight than the ribbon itself. For exceptional courage and decisive action in the protection of civilian lives. Flashes from cameras burst like small explosions in my peripheral vision. I kept my chin steady, my breathing even, years of training and composure serving me well. But inside, something warm pressed against my ribs. It wasn't pride in the way people often mean it. It was relief. Relief that, for once, my work could be acknowledged in daylight instead of shadows. A week later, a letter arrived. Heavy cardstock, gold seal, from U.S. Special Operations Command. The commander's handwriting was sharp and deliberate. Your actions at Lexington were an example of the highest standard of joint operations. You continue to embody the quiet excellence that holds the line. I read it twice before folding it back into the envelope. This wasn't just acknowledgement. It was proof that my path, unconventional as it was, still ran alongside the most respected warriors in the field. Back home, the air felt different. Trina hadn't said much since the gala, not a jab, not a side comment. At first, I thought she was simply recalibrating her tactics. But at a Sunday lunch, she passed me the serving dish without any trace of mockery in her eyes. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it was also the first time the old motif, "no place for you," was absent from her body language. There was space now, not demanded, not negotiated, just there. It happened at a family gathering 2 months later, one of those events where the kitchen hums louder than the music, and relatives drift between rooms with plates in their hands. I was standing by the back porch when a family friend, someone I barely remembered from childhood, approached me. "So, Tessa, what is it you do these days?" Before I could answer, my father, who had been refilling drinks nearby, turned toward the man, his voice carried over the clink of ice and glasses. "She protects the people who can't protect themselves," he said. Then, without missing a beat, he added, "That's my daughter." For a moment, the conversation around us seemed to dip, like a needle lifting off a record. I glanced at him, half expecting a smirk or some trace of irony, but there was none. His eyes were steady, his tone free of the guarded distance he'd always maintained when speaking about me. The words hung in the air, and I felt the shift, not just in him, but in how everyone else in earshot would now see me. It was public, deliberate, and it inverted everything he'd once declared in that gala ballroom. The man he'd been that night, confident in dismissing me as a failed soldier, was replaced by one who placed me in the very center of where I'd always belonged. It wasn't just an apology. It was a redefinition, a reversal so clear it left no room for the old motif to creep back. Later, while guests drifted toward dessert, he found me on the porch. "I meant what I said," he told me quietly. "And I should have said it years ago." I didn't respond right away. The cool night air carried the scent of cut grass, and I let that fill the space between us. Some things didn't need to be answered in the moment. Some could simply be received. As the laughter from inside spilled into the yard, I realized this was what standing in the right place felt like. Not because someone had decided to give me a seat, but because I'd built it myself. And now, finally, he'd chosen to stand beside me. That evening, the house was quieter than I'd heard it in years. The kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just stripped of the noise that had always filled the space between us. We sat in the living room, a small pot of tea between us. The steam curled upward like something too fragile to touch. He poured my cup first, a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. Then, without looking at me, he spoke. "The truth is," he began, his voice low, "I was wrong, about more than I care to admit. But you still chose your path, and you did it better than anyone could have imagined." The words hung there, weighty and awkward, like they weren't used to being said out loud. I studied his face, still lined, still sharp, but now softened by something that looked a lot like humility. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Part of me wanted to say, "I forgive you." But forgiveness is more complicated than a sentence. Sometimes it's not about declaring it. It's about the choice to stay, even for just one more cup of tea. So I didn't speak those words. Instead, I nodded slightly and took a sip. The warmth spread through my chest, steady and unhurried. He shifted in his chair, hands curling around his own cup. "When I told people there was no place for you, I thought I was protecting the family's reputation. I didn't see I was cutting you out of something you'd already earned." The admission was jagged, and I could tell it cost him something to let it out. But he didn't flinch when our eyes met. We didn't need to dissect the past any further, not tonight. We sat there in the hum of the ticking clock, letting the space between us fill with something new, not quite mended, but no longer fractured in the same way. When the tea ran low, he poured what was left into my cup instead of his own. That said more than anything else. In the days that followed, I thought about that night more than I expected. Not because it erased years of distance, nothing can undo what's already been lived, but because it shifted something fundamental. I realized my worth had never been in the way he or anyone else measured it. It was in the quiet consistency of showing up, doing the work, and holding the line even when no one was watching. Still, having him choose to see it now was its own kind of gift. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't even closure in the way people usually mean it. It was the recognition that the story he once told about me, the failed soldier, the one who never quite belonged, no longer fit the truth. And maybe that was enough. The irony was, I didn't have to fight for that shift to happen. I didn't have to stand in that gala ballroom and shout my record into the air. The proof had been in my actions all along. There's a sweetness to that kind of ending, because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't proving someone wrong with words. It's living in a way that makes their old story about you impossible to believe. The morning after that thought settled in, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address, Joint Special Operations Task Element, inside a letter. "Captain Monroe," it read, "your insight and operational experience remain of exceptional value to this command. We invite you to return as a strategic advisor. There will always be a place for you here." I read that last line twice. It was almost too perfect, how the motif had turned itself inside out. From no place for you to always a place here, I didn't decide right away whether I'd accept. Some doors are tempting to walk through again, but the real victory was knowing it was mine to choose this time. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.